New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
New Thought Media Network is proud to present New Thought's Roots and Branches with Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller. Join us every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Mountain Time. Tune in live or watch anytime on our YouTube channel. Discover the rich history of New Thought and its impact on modern spirituality. Join Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller as she shares insights, stories, and teachings that inspire and uplift. Experience deep insights and transformative teachings that connect you to the roots of New Thought. Visit our YouTube channel to catch up on past episodes and join us live every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Connect with us and be part of the journey.
Well, hello there. I am Ruth Miller, your peripatetic instructor, and today we're going to be talking about one very powerful presence in the New Thought tradition. In fact, perhaps the founding member of the New Thought tradition in the way that it has evolved in the U.S., Emma Curtis Hopkins. Now, as we have gone through this process, if we look at the next slide, we can see how this marvelously complex set of ideas came into being. And if we looked at all of that historical, traditional stuff, we can see there's Emma right there in the center near the bottom. So all our modern teachers have drawn heavily on her work, and she has drawn heavily on all those previous workers before her. And if we look at the next slide, we can see how our modern teachers are all interconnected in this remarkable web that we call New Thought. And there is Emma fairly near the center there with her teacher, Mrs. Eddy, over to the side. So in their next slide, we get to look at Emma herself. There are very, very few pictures of this woman. The classic one is the sepia tone one in the middle. The ones on either side, I think, are very interesting. I think these pictures were all taken when she got married. It was not unusual to have only one or two photographs in one's whole life. But if you look at the dark one on the, wow, which side is that for you? The right side, there we go, where she's looking off to the side. You know, that's kind of her classic pose. But if you look at the other one, that's almost a maroon shade, look at that one, because it says a lot about how people experienced the woman we call Emma Curtis Hopkins. She's almost hypnotic in the way she's looking at you. And a lot of people felt like there was marvelous, marvelous love shining through those eyes, but there was a lot of power there. And that's what Emma brought to people over and over and over again. So she's called the teacher of teachers in the next slide. She was a practitioner first. She was the editor of a journal, and then she became a teacher. And then she formed a seminary. Actually, she formed two. And then she founded what became known as the High Watch Fellowship, which was originally the Hopkins Associations. And at one point, there were 500 different Hopkins associations, each with everywhere from 10 to 50 members all over this country. So she was pretty active and present in a lot of places in the world. If we look at her early life in the next slide, she was born Josephine Emma Curtis and was known as Emma from the beginning because Josephine is a big mouthful. She was the eldest of 9 kids. And her sister always said she was born in 1853, so it took a while for people to find that there was an accepted date of 49. Her father was a farmer in Killingly, Connecticut. He went into the Civil War, became a POW, came back an amputee, so he was no longer able to farm. And the family during the war nearly starved. They had a horrible time getting on. And you can hear that in some of the stories she shares in her teachings. And then she, even though she was partially responsible for keeping the farm going, she was an amazing student, very avid studier. And she finished high school at 15, which then put her in the place of becoming a teacher. In the next slide, we see that she started teaching secondary school at one of the local academies, which is what a secondary school might be called, at 16. She taught math, particularly geometry. She loved the way that geometry was so orderly and you could develop a proof. And that shows up in all of her writings. She also taught chemistry and biology and the sciences, not so much in the physics. I think even when I was going to school, girls were not given many opportunities to study physics. But she also taught language. She taught the English language, of course, Shakespearean English, the King James Bible English. But beyond that, she was conversant in Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and in order to study the Bible. And she went on in later years after she was teaching to study a little bit of German and Italian because she found that very useful in her interest, which she proceeded with as she was going on in life, in philosophy. She studied the philosophers from very ancient times. In the next slide, we see that her life began to change somewhere about 25. Funny thing about that, she married George Hopkins, and she had to stop teaching, which was very hard for her. She often went around with her nose in a book, but she was not allowed to teach because married women were not allowed to teach. Well into the 1950s in some part of this country, a woman who had had the experience of a marriage bed was not allowed to work with children. I often wonder what they think mothers are, but that's another story. Her younger sister, Elise, moved in to help when Emma became pregnant and John was born in June of 75. So, all things went in clockwork, but she didn't have any more children. She just had the one son. They were always very poor. And this was interesting to me. In the 1880s, they had married in the 70s. So he had gone to college in 69 to 74. He was paying off college debts in the 1880s. Who knew? It's not a new idea. And the family being very poor and living in relatively urban areas where, we have dirt streets with maybe a wooden sidewalk. We have cats and dogs and rats and all kinds of critters. We've got horses. We've got, open fireplaces, maybe a wood stove, but not fully sealed. And then we have the factory smokestacks. You can imagine what it was like to breathe. And there was no vacuum cleaner. They were stuck sweeping and beating rugs to get rid of the worst of the dust. So everyone was dealing with respiratory problems during those years. And this family being relatively poor, in poor quality housing, with not a whole lot of money for food, and without having someone at the head of the household, Emma, the mother of the household, being interested in housekeeping, they suffered a lot, which was very hard on everyone. But something began to change as they were living in New Hampshire. In the next slide, we see that a neighbor came in and offered to invited Emma to tea. Mrs. Hopkins, would you like to join us for tea? I have a special guest. And that special guest turned out to be Mary Baker Eddy. And Emma, the student of science and philosophy, was not impressed with what Mrs. Eddy had to say. However, a few weeks later, when the Hopkins household was once more very sick and the doctors were not able to help, the neighbor actually begged to be able to do a treatment for them. She came over and insisted, please, 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 let me treat for you. So Emma thought, no harm, and let her do the treatment. And amazingly, within 24 hours, everyone in the household was well. Well, that woke Emma up to a whole new way of being. And if we go to the next slide, we learn that she immediately wrote to Mrs. Eddy, and this is 1883, and she says, I must learn from the teacher herself. She wasn't willing to learn from her neighbor because, well, her neighbor would only have part of the information, right? But then she said, I have no funds because of my husband's college debts. And that was the first time I had encountered that information. And then she said, I'll pay from the proceeds of my work as a practitioner. So Mrs. Eddy said yes, accepted those terms, let her into the December 1883 class, which would have been about 10 weeks after the healing. And then, Emma attended. It was 1 week, 12 lessons, 6 in the morning and 6 in the afternoon. So it was a 6-day class, actually. It was the basic course. And by February, we see that Emma is now a practitioner of Christian Science with an ad in the Christian Science Journal for her services, both in New Hampshire and in Boston. And in the next slide, we find out that for the next couple of years, between December of 83 and turns out to be October of 85, she's commuting back and forth, mostly by stagecoach, to Boston from their home in New Hampshire, where her husband is still teaching. She was working as a practitioner, and then in September of 84, they asked her to come on board as the editor of the Christian Science Journal. And she was that for a good year. She would live at the college for a few days every week or two, and then go back to New Hampshire and be the mom. Elise was keeping the household together. John was growing up. He would have been 10, 12 during these years. And not quite 10, actually, because he was born in 75. So these were his early school years when Emma was going back and forth. In the next slide, we find how Emma tended to defend Mrs. Eddy. I'm going to read this slide to you. She says, no student, I speak from knowledge of facts, has ever yet been qualified to teach Christian Science, except rudimentarily. To me, she says, the words of my teacher on the theme of spiritual being were first as the gentle touch of a mother sitting, lifting the world-weary form of her wayward child to her bosom. She said, I was made to know him, that is the source. I was made to know him face to face, whom I had heard by the hearing of the ear as a name only. I know that every single student that has ever studied under this teacher sent from God has realized it all. Yes? She says, how great then the folly of falling back to earthly ambitions and earthly ends by claiming to work the same miracle for the pottage reward of a little publicity and a few $100s. So that was how she wrote and what she said in letters and in this journal in response to people who were saying, well, I could do this. She was saying, there's no way. Mrs. Eddy has made that connection and made it alive for me. And there is no way that I, as a student, or anyone else as a student, could do as well. That was a very profound position to take. But unfortunately, we find out that over the next year, she ends up having to change. So in the next slide, we find that she wrote a series of articles in which she really continued to sing the praises of Mrs. Eddy, but in the context of other writers, of Taoism and Buddhism, of other philosophers, of Christian philosophers. And so that was beginning to be a problem for Mrs. Eddy. And we talked about that before. But another piece of the puzzle is a woman named Mary Plunkett, who had been a student of a man in Chicago named Swartz, and was now studying with Mrs. Eddy, and she was wanting to create a movement of her own. Well, we learn later about Mary Plunkett that this is not exactly a woman of even high repute, much less high character. She had more than one child out of wedlock and then had a notorious affair, all of it after she left Emma. But she's not exactly the kind of person one would want to connect with. But apparently she wooed Emma at a time when the college was going, we need to be more restrictive in what we speak of in the journal. And Mrs. Plunkett was saying, oh, but we could be doing this, we could be doing this. So the combination was that in October of 1885, Emma Curtis Hopkins was summarily dismissed from the journal and from the college, told there was no more place for her there. Very soon thereafter, Mr. Swartz invited her to Chicago. He was going traveling to Europe. Would she be willing to edit his journal while he was gone for 6 months? So the Hopkins family packed up their belongings, got on the train from Boston to Chicago, and in February of 1886, we see advertisements in one of the Chicago papers for not only Mrs. Hopkins' Christian Science Practitioner Service, but also a place for people to stay, certain patients, special patients to stay. What that meant was if there was someone, particularly a woman, who was dealing with some long-term illness that a few treatments wouldn't work, she would take them into her home and she would lead them through the whole process of the 12 lessons. And we'll see that as we go forward. So the second thing they did in Chicago, you'll see in the next slide, is they created a seminary, which they called the Hopkins Seminary, which interests me because Mary Plunkett is the one who wanted it. But Hopkins was the one whose name was known. And she took on her understanding of the 12 lessons and began to write up her own version, very, very slowly moving away from the strictly Christian perspective. And I've managed now to edit, I think, 10 versions of her 12 lessons, at least 8. And I have seen that progression where there's more and more of these other philosophies worked in. But this one was her very first one there in 1886. And during the next couple of years, in between offering courses in the seminary, she traveled to various places, including San Francisco and New York and Kansas City and other places, teaching groups of up to 250 people. Their first graduating class was in June of 1886, and there was a fellow in that class named E.B. Weeks. And he went on in August of 1886 to present his version of the 12 lessons in Kansas City, Missouri, which led to the complete transformation of a young couple in Kansas City who will become an important part of our puzzle as we move forward with these roots and branches. So in the next slide, you can see a photograph, the large photograph, their first lessons from the journals. I'm part of Wise Woman Press, and our editor, Michael Terranova, found these notes in the journals, in the archives of the International New Thought Alliance, which at that time was in Mesa, Arizona, but has just recently moved to Unity Village. And this month is their grand opening. It's very exciting. But there's going to be another opening when I'm there for the INTA meeting in June. So if you want to see these archives, that'll be a marvelous opportunity. In any case, this book, the first lessons from the journals, are very similar to Eddie with only minor modifications. The next book, the class lessons of 1888, we had thought, all of us who were studying Emma, thought was the first published version of her lessons. And both of these are published by Wise Women Press, which is now an imprint of Portal Center Press. And I'll give you that link as we go down. But these are some of the earliest, these are the earliest 2 books we have from this amazing writer. And in these books, she developed 12 lessons. Now, I'm going to go very quickly and very surfacely with you over these lessons. But if you are interested, I do offer on YouTube, on my personal channel, Ruth L. Miller, you will find all 12 lessons recorded from classes that I have taught, and you can follow and develop your own skills with them. In the next slide, we're going to look at lesson 1. And lesson 1 is the foundation. It's the statement of being is another language. And you can see the idea is that we are always seeking our good. And I love this line. Why do you move your right hand? You move it to get your good. You breathe to get your good. The stones sit still and wait for their good. All beingness is looking for its good, is seeking, is expecting, is anticipating, is desiring more of its good. And in the very last line there, all that I call good becomes my God, because it drives me and pushes me and leads me on. And as she develops the logic in lesson 1, we see that it must be good, must be omnipresent, that is everywhere present in all things. And in modern times, we say that's the quantum field or the underlying intelligence of the universe. It's also omnipotent. That is, it is the only power in the universe. Not it's more powerful than other powers, but it is the only power. And finally, it is omniscient. It is the only intelligence everywhere, and it is everywhere present, right? So good is the foundation, good as having these qualities. In the next slide, we look at lesson 2. And lesson 2 is saying, well, you had that idea, but guess what? As soon as you see that, you're going to have all these other thoughts of what isn't real. So what we have to do is recognize we have to let go of, negate, deny, dissolve any ideas that aren't real. Because in our culture, we've grown up being taught a lot of things that don't have much to do with reality with a capital R or with omnipotent good, right? So we move into the second lesson of releasing and dissolving what isn't serving us to believe anymore. And then the reason for that is that second bold statement, all that stands between you and your good, which belongs to you and which you ought to have here and now, is your own idea of the absence of good. And we all have that idea. We all think, well, I'll go out and get, or I have to do this to get, or somewhere, someday, maybe I will, all of those things. But Jesus taught the kingdom of heaven, that is, that realm in which everything is perfect and wonderfully, fabulously delicious, is right here at hand. And that's what she's dealing with here. Our belief that it isn't is the only reason we're not experiencing it, which gets us into lesson 3. And in lesson 3, she reminds us that having emptied out the space of the beliefs that don't work, we need to replace them immediately with truth, which she calls affirmations. And she says, when the right negations are stated, our affirmations are exceedingly effective because mind and conditions follow the inner vision. If I'm worried about this or I'm focusing on the possibility out there of something and I'm not focusing on it being here now, oh my goodness, then my whole life condition is going to arrange itself to support it's not here now, right? So lesson 3 gives us a set of affirmations that we can use. And there are 5 basic ones, and then she invites us to do 2 more. And we use these that help us to know that the good is present. And in that second bold statement, we release the ideas that we are separate from our good, lesson 2, and experience more good in their place. She calls this giving forness. Forgiveness as giving forness. As I release what I am no longer accepting as reality, a space is open for the divine, the infinite, all that is, the power that is all that is, to express itself more fully in my life. If we go on to lesson 4, then we're talking about the faith that engenders. She calls faith confidence to command. Remember, in the New Testament, Jesus tells his disciples, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you would tell this mountain to move and it would move, right? And then she says, I love this quote, Jesus didn't say, according to your denials and affirmations, be it unto thee. Rather, according to your faith, be it unto thee. What is it you know so deeply down inside you to be true that you can automatically say, yes, that is so, and I will it to be. I think of flipping on light switches in rooms. Most of us, that we have faith that the power is going to be there when we flip a light switch, right? And as we begin to let go of those old ideas and replace them with the new ideas, then that which we know deep down inside us is more and more in alignment with the source of all of our being. And so at the end, she says, I believe that only the good rules in and with my life. When we can say that, only the good, there is nothing else but good, then we are no longer holding the good away from us. Our own self-defined idea of good is what we have been holding away from us. So if we go to lesson 5 in the next slide, we realize that part of what's going on here is what we are saying is how that faith works itself out, right? I have to command it to happen. And when we talk about Emily Cady, we'll talk about her experience around this. So Emma says, our words make our faith the working principle, right? And in the next line, that highlighted line, that bold line, all our faith and all our reasoning simply open our eyes to the real world. So we're not changing anything with our words. We are dissolving, erasing the cover over them, the illusion, if you will, that our previous thoughts were generating. We have been seeing the world through our old thoughts. As we let them go, we experience the world more fully as it truly is. And that's what lesson 5 is about. Moving on to lesson 6, we see that the power is not the words, right? But the power is coming through the words. So as I am speaking these words, I am allowing that infinite power to express itself in and through me. She says the word is a pathway to the power. And the power is what she calls the secret of the Lord, which is one of the names for lesson 6. So that power is always present. But as I speak the word, the power flows through me. And this is the essence of a practitioner's treatment. And then she says, in the bottom line there, keep the words of truth going continually. They will change your life and increase your power continually. She means night and day. Every song you sing, everything that you read, everything that you are doing. You're doing your chores, you're reciting these words. The words of lesson 1, the affirmations of lesson 3, even the denials and negations of lesson 2. Whatever you can do to repeat these ideas, fill your mind with these ideas, then begins to change how your world shows up. Because as you fill your mind, the old ideas have less and less power. You're literally rewiring your brain as you do this. And that's what she's encouraging in lesson 6, which brings us to the beginning of our ability to change the world out there. So in the next slide, we're looking at lesson 7. 1 through 6 in Emma's work is about us. It's taking care of us. It's bringing us to that place of power. 7 through 12 is about the world out there, how we can effect our own world in good ways, but also have an affect and an effect on the people around us, to affect the world around us so that the people around us can be healthy and strong as well. And she tells us in lesson 7, you are a miracle worker by inherent right. Woo! Most of us are self-deprecating. We won't say, oh, no, I couldn't possibly do that. I'm too humble to acknowledge that. No, she's saying accept that truth. You are a miracle worker. You are doing it all the time. Whether you know it or not, your thought processes are bringing forth experiences in alignment with those thought processes. That's how the universe works. You are making miracles all the time. And as you experience more and more of what we call synchronicities, which we talked about earlier, way back when, then you are experiencing more and more clear connection between, oh, I had this thought, and oh, here's an event supporting that thought, right? You are a miracle worker by inherent right. You were born this way. And then down at the bottom in the next bold thing, no disease or distress comes from material causes, no matter what the world says. All right. For those of us who have studied a bit of microbiology, we are aware there are germs, quote unquote, all kinds of microbes everywhere on our bodies, in our world all the time. We don't get sick because we come into contact with them. We have illness symptoms or symptoms of illness when our own immune system, our own body-mind system is out of balance, and then we get the symptoms. And then there is an increase of those particular microbes in that set of symptoms. So I don't buy the germ theory, by the way, but that's what she's saying, that matter never causes any symptoms, right? It's our own mindset, our own thoughts and feelings that result in the symptoms. And she, like P.P. Quimby before her and before us, remember he had 12,000 documented people go through his offices and come out without symptoms. Well, Emma had 11,000 people who went through her practitioner process. And 110 of them went through all of her training and ended up becoming ordained as ministers and teachers. So no disease or distress, any kind of distress, comes from material causes. It's all from our own thinking process. And as we go on to lesson 8, then, we realize that we have been deceived by what we've been told about the world and what we have come to believe about the world, all right? And so the essence of lesson 8, the title actually is, see no evil or be not deceived. She's telling us that spirit never gives us any illusions. Matter is the only place we get those illusions. And in the bottom line, she says, we address the whole experience that we have, right? All that we see in the world by changing the ideas in our mind. If we have issues or challenges in the world, we change the ideas in our mind, then we let the world alone. We don't have to be out there making changes. We change this. Now, the piece that's not always spoken of is then we do what we are guided to do that may or may not seem to be directly related to the issue. So my Unitarian friends especially need to hear this. It's not that we never are active in the world. We never try to do anything to make the world a better place. But it's that we are guided to act from the change in our thought process rather than from responding to whatever else is going on. So we allow the world to dissolve into the good that we know is the only reality. Good is all that is. Everything else is an illusion. So that gets us to lesson 9. The world in which we live is the exact record of our thoughts. There you are. If I want to have the world be different, I have to change my thoughts. And related to thoughts are the feeling, the intense feelings that go with them. And she talks about that in lessons 8 and lesson 7, that the intensity of our determination not to experience this illusion anymore has to be as great as our intensity was to latch onto the illusion in the first place, right? So this world is that, and therefore we don't accuse ourselves or anyone else of doing anything wrong because it's all the illusion that was generated by thoughts that were, in many cases, imposed on us, certainly trained into us growing up. And then she says, we choose the good, so we dwell in I am satisfied in joyful delight. And wherever we go, people are healed. So one of the secondary corollaries of this one is don't hang out your sign as a healer, because as you do the work, people won't show up who need healing. They'll just be healed. And you may recall that Mary Baker Eddy had that kind of experience around her at least once and probably many times. Lesson 10 then, we see that we're ignoring the distressing appearance because it's the product of imagination, previous thoughts and feelings and worries and concerns coming into being, right? And in the next highlight, we begin to teach others to do what we can do, and so our works become permanent. Emma spent a lot of time helping people learn how to teach, and she said, go make this your own and teach it to the world that you may have the experience become permanent in your world. And in lesson 11, she sees that we can begin to discern the truth in all circumstances, where we're not being deceived in lesson 8 by the appearances, we're not being guided by old thoughts into having accusations of anything, but we can see clearly. The seeing through divine eyes dissolves all that is unlike good. And she calls that perfect judgment. Now, in the Course in Miracles, it says the last judgment is the last time a human being judges anyone. And here she's saying that judgment is completely reframed from I evaluate, I criticize, I judge, to, I see only what is real here. And finally, that gets us to lesson 12. And she tells us that our loving focus on the one life that is, working all through, it lifts us above all attachments and opinions. When we are focused on that one, we are lifted. And all of you who have ever been in a profound prayer or delivered a profound treatment or been in the presence of someone who's in that state, you can feel that lifting. It doesn't matter what was happening before. You're lifted into this realm of loving beingness, yes? And in that state, she says, we now see that there is nothing work for us to do. There is no work for us to do. There is no thing for us to make happen. All right? We are the one we've been seeking. All is good. Now, that is a very, 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 very brief overview of what it was that Emma was teaching. And she taught it thousands of times, probably 20 times every month, right? For years. And so it varied over the years. What you've seen here is my summary of my summaries of her work, as simply because I've edited so many of them. And most of this information can be found in my book, Unveiling Your Hidden Power, which gives her daily practices as well as her lessons. So she did teach this over and over again, and yet, well, she was human. Funny thing about that. And so she faced challenges. So in the next slide, we get to see some of those challenges. She continued to be criticized almost her whole life by Mary Baker Eddy. Mary Baker Eddy passed on before Emma did, so there was freedom at the end. And yet, Hopkins always called her my beloved teacher. She never, ever, ever returned the criticism, which I think is a very high state of consciousness. The next thing that happened was Mary Plunkett just up and left and took the journal and took all the administrative stuff from what they had been doing together in Chicago between 1886 and 1888. The summer of 88, Emma is left there in Chicago with no school or no way to proceed with the school, no way to reach her students, nothing, except that a Methodist minister, a local, that had been one of her patients and then one of her students, was working with her, and he said, well, let's create a real seminary here. Let's do this the right way. So he invited her to print up the class lessons of 1888 and send them out, for a small sum to all of her people that she knew how to reach and that he knew how to reach. And then those went out to further, and they went out to further, and they went out to further people. And all of the funds came back in. And with those funds, they launched what they called the Christian Science Seminary of Chicago. And so this minister was a great help. Also, another challenge after Mary Plunkett left was that her, 20 years later, her husband divorced her for abandoning him, which is interesting because he had moved to Chicago with her, but then he was bouncing back and forth between Chicago and New England. He was not happy in Chicago. And then he stayed in New England, and then he divorced her for abandoning him. I've never quite figured that one out, unless it was because she got so into her mystical experiences that he was no longer able to even experience her as his wife. And that may have been part of the whole thing. The next big challenge was just a couple years after that, though. And that was when her son, who had been a graduate of the Merchant Marine Academy, which, by the way, scholarship he earned, she believes, after she spent 3 days on her knees in prayer, looking for the funds for her son to be properly educated. And he got the scholarship, went through the Merchant Marine Academy, but then became quite ill on some of the trips down in Central America and finally passed away in 2005, which helps us to understand what happened in the years around that and following that. If we look in the next slide, during the period between 1888 and 1905, she published those class lessons. She founded that new school. She established what are called the Hopkins associations, that group of 500 associations where students and students of students could gather and study this material. She continued to travel, and she then published this marvelous series of books called the Bible Studies or Bible Interpretations, which Wise Women Press has been making available. I have volume 24 getting approved. And in 1895, she quit doing the seminary to do other things and then moved on. In the next slide, she went on to travel more. She connected with a woman called Mabel Dodge in New York, who married a man named Lujan in New Mexico. So Mabel Dodge Lujan took Emma to Taos, where she got to hang out with Gertrude Stein and D.H. Lawrence and all those artistic folks. And that's got to have made a huge difference in everyone's life. She went on and finally in 1918 published the first version of High Mysticism. I now have, I think, 4 different versions of that book. And she was elected president of the International New Thought Alliance during that year, which is when she first met Ernest Holmes, also met Nona Brooks and many of the other students of her students. If we look at this next slide, you can see some of the book covers of the books that Wise Women Press has published. There are other publishers working with this material. I've just put together the purple one in the corner next to the little black one. It's my Essential Emma. It takes those original volumes from High Mysticism, Scientific Christian Mental Practice, and a book called Resume, puts them in one volume so you get them all. And then the little black book next to it is Self-Treatments. And it's things that I've pulled out of various of her materials as The Radiant I Am, which is powerful in itself, but all of her other comments from Lesson 7 and so on. The other books, the blue ones, are the Bible Interpretations, and I just thought you might like to see a few of the books in physical form, because in the next slide, you get to see the Wikipedia list of the very many publications that are attributed to Emma Curtis Hopkins on just Wikipedia. Final slide, winding down, not quite the final slide, almost. She finally began to have heart issues in 23. She called it not so much an illness as God calling an end to a career. I thought that was beautiful. She took about a year to hang out on the farm where she grew up, where her younger sister Elise was managing, and then went back into New York for the season in 1924, which meant she was there when Ernest Holmes finally approached her yet again. He'd probably done it 5 or 6 times for an interview, and she said yes. And so in October of 1924, Ernest Holmes gets to hear Emma's lessons in person. And she finally passed away in April of 25. Next slide, at the family home, listening to her favorite verses in the Bible. And that's the essence of Emma Curtis Hopkins. You can see her gravestone there. And that's the Curtis family stone with a special plaque just for Emma. So the teacher of teachers, those were some of the things she taught. I hope you found this useful. We'll find out some of the many people that she did teach over the next weeks to come. Thanks for joining me today on Roots and Branches. It's been a fun time to be with you. Bye.